Okay, so I'm currently working on refining my logo a little bit here, and so I kind of I'm doing a lot of balancing of the lockup. So I kind of want to show you the technique that I'm using to do this. So I'm going to create a new document so that I can show you an example of what's happening. So I'm just going to paste this in. And this is kind of one of the ways that I balance logos. And I'm going to jumble this up just so that it's disconnected now. Okay. This is one of the ways that I balance logos. There are obviously other ways, but I'm just going to show you what I do. So I'm going to make sure that all of these are curves. Make sure that this is curves. Okay, cool. So the first thing I start with is the logo. I feel like the logo is foundational. Everything is based off of the logo, so that's what I start with. So I'm going to grab my rectangle tool and I'm going to get rid of the stroke and I'm going to pick a very noticeable color. We're going to go like a bright pink. And I'm going to look at my logo and try and point out some of the most noticeable elements of it. So for example, if I just bring a brush in here, this element here is pretty noticeable. This element here is pretty noticeable, and of course this square. So there's like three things that are noticeable. And I kind of want to look at these and reference these as I'm balancing. And by the way, balancing a logo basically means figuring out the spacing between your word mark and your logo and determining the size and scale of things as well. So like I'm going to mess with the scale of my word mark here like that and change the scale of this. So I have to completely start from scratch. So when I'm balancing, I need to determine what is a balanced and good looking size and scale for my lockup. And the lockup is the combination of the logo and the word mark. So we have three elements of the logo that are primary, that stand out the most. So I'm going to use that to dictate kind of my spacing of things. And a lot of it is really just testing. So it's like I see this here and I think of, okay, the gap that exists here. This can be a spacing element like that. So maybe I just put this at the bottom and the word mark goes under it, and that's going to be the spacing, and it would look like that. That could work, but I'll show you what I went with in the end here. So the biggest blockiest thing is obviously this block here. So what I did is I drew a rectangle around this thing, and it's a little tricky to draw a rectangle around a curved object, but we're just gonna place it here. That pretty much did it. Perfect. So there we go. I have that drawn over it and it matches perfectly. So I'm going to base everything, all of the scale and sizing and spacing and proportions off of this square that I drew. So I'm gonna shrink this a little bit to give myself more room on the canvas. And I just did this, and so I'm just gonna show you what I did. But what I do next is I determine a border, kind of like a moat or a margin around the logo. So by placing this in the bottom corner, like so, and then the top corner, whichever corner works for you, I do bottom right, top left, just like that. That looks lined up. And then what I do is I like to be a little fancy and use dotted lines on a stroke. And I'm going to draw this here. I don't want any corners and I don't want any fill. So let's get rid of that. And I'm going to increase the stroke so I can see it a little more. Like that. And then I'm going to duplicate this and scale it up. And put it on the outside of my squares here. And make sure that it's properly placed. Now these aren't always going to be squares, and so I was constraining it, but I shouldn't have constrained it because it's not always going to be a square. So now I have the margin around my logo where this is open space. Nothing is allowed to enter into here, which means I cannot place my logo in that space. It must exist outside of it somehow, like this. So that being said, since I'm going to do like just a vertical mock-up where the logo's on top of the word mark, I know that this is going to be underneath it here. And because I drew my margins, I know that it's not going to go above into this margin. So now I need to determine how tall or how big do I want my word mark to be, because I could take this and center it and go something like that. Okay, sure, that looks good, but I just kind of eyeballed it, which, hey, sometimes you do just need to eyeball it. But then if I go this big, the logo's too small. So it's the way I like to work. I like to have proportions, and I like to have everything be based off of something, preferably something within the design itself, if that makes sense. So what I'm going to do, this square here is my reference point for everything still. So I'm going to use this to dictate the scale of my word mark. And what I eventually landed on was 2 of these squares on top of each other gives me the height. So I'm going to duplicate that, add it on top, and then group it. And then I'm going to bring it over here to the side. And something I can do too is click on this and then click on my word mark. And I'm going to make it the same height, maintain the aspect ratio, and apply that. Now this is going to get customized later, but for now this is fine. And now I'm going to center it on my logo. There we go. And I'm going to make sure that it is lined up to the margin there, which it is. Perfect. So I could roll with this. You know, it's the entire word mark is 2 squares tall. But to me, this looks a little small still. The word mark looks a little too small. So what I'm going to do is, instead of going from cap height to descender height, descender depth, whatever you want to call that, I'm going to go from baseline to cap height. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to increase this to right there so that the baseline comes down to the bottom of the squares. Basically, just like that. So now the bulk of the words are 2 squares tall, and then I have a couple of descenders that will go a little bit below that, which honestly isn't too big a deal. And then I like to draw around it. So I'm gonna draw from here. That gets my descender height solidified, and then I'll do that. And now I can hide this. There we go. That kind of gives me some guidelines and some structure for my logo, which looks pretty good. Now what I can do, I'm just gonna take all of these things and turn it off. There we go. That is the final balanced word mark. And it was proportioned and scaled based off of something existing in the logo. So I didn't pull it out of thin air. I didn't pull it randomly out of nothing. It kind of exists in its own little world. So wanted to show that. Hopefully that's useful to someone. Thanks for watching, and peace out.